They mocked the barren alien princess by giving her to a human, then she came back as a mother. The laughter was still ringing in her ears when the transport doors sealed shut behind her. Princess Vela of the Doran Empire stood with her back straight and her hands folded at her waist, the way her mother had trained her to stand even when the world was collapsing beneath her feet. The royal hall of Dihor Prime was already disappearing through the small porthole window, its high crystalline towers catching the pale violet light of their dying sun, and she did not allow herself to blink, because blinking felt too close to crying, and she had already decided she would not cry. Not here. Not where any of them could see it. She had heard the whispers for years. Vela, the hollow one. Vela, the rootless branch. The medical tests had confirmed what the healers suspected when she was just 19 cycles old. Her body could not carry life. The Doran placed enormous value on lineage and bloodline continuation. A princess who could not bear an heir was not a princess at all in their eyes. She was a problem to be solved, or a weight to be discarded. The Emperor, her own father, had chosen to discard her. The alliance treaty with the Galactic Commonwealth had required a symbolic exchange, a cultural ambassador from the Doran side, offered in the spirit of unity and cooperation. Her father had smiled at her across the long table during the council meeting, and said, with all the warmth of a stone wall, that Vela would be the most suitable candidate. Her younger sister, already pregnant with her second child, had looked away. Her brothers had not looked away. They had watched her face, searching for the crack, the moment she would break and beg. She had not given them the satisfaction. She had packed her belongings in one evening, said goodbye to no one except the old groundskeeper who had taught her to grow blue moss flowers in the palace courtyard. And she had walked onto that transport ship with her spine straight and her chin level, and her heart turned to something hard and quiet inside her chest. The Commonwealth had assigned her a residence on a mid-tier station called Cresswell Hub, orbiting a warm yellow star in a system populated mostly by humans. She had not known much about humans before the assignment. What she knew was that they were young as a species, chaotic, loud, and inexplicably adaptable. The Doran scholars described them the way you might describe a weed, difficult to kill, growing in places where nothing sensible should grow. She learned very quickly that the scholars had not been entirely wrong. Her assigned liaison was a man named Cole Navarro. He was waiting for her at the docking bay when she arrived, holding a handwritten paper sign with her name spelled slightly wrong, Vela, and wearing a jacket that had a small coffee stain on the left cuff that he clearly had not noticed. He was tall for a human, with brown skin and dark eyes and the kind of easy, unhurried smile that she had no framework for interpreting. Doran men did not smile like that. Doran men smiled strategically, or they did not smile at all. He greeted her in careful, accented Doran first, then switched to the Commonwealth common tongue when she replied in it. He asked if she had eaten during the transit. She had not. He said that there was a place near the residential block that served a soup she might like, and he asked if she wanted to eat before seeing her quarters or after. She stared at him for a long moment. She was a deposed alien princess who had just been given away like a trade good, and he was asking her about soup. Before, she said. He nodded. Good call, the quarters aren't going anywhere. That was the beginning of it. Vela had expected to be studied. She had expected the careful diplomatic distance that species maintained with one another when they were still deciding how much to trust. She had expected forms to fill and orientation sessions to sit through and polite, meaningless conversation. She had experienced all of that in the first 2 days. But Cole Navarro kept appearing. He was technically her assigned liaison for the first 3 months, responsible for helping her understand the station's systems and the social landscape. And he kept being strange in ways she did not anticipate. He argued with her, for instance. Not aggressively, but directly. When she said something he thought was wrong, he said so. When she made an assumption about human customs that was inaccurate, he corrected it without embarrassment on either side. When she asked questions that were, by Doran standards, invasive or impolite, He answered them plainly and then asked equally direct questions in return, as if conversation were simply an exchange of information between two people rather than a careful performance. She found it deeply strange and, after about 3 weeks, deeply refreshing. She also found that her chest hurt less on the days she talked to him. She did not examine that too closely in the beginning. She was still learning to live inside her new life, which was quieter than her old one and less decorated, but also less sharp. Nobody on Cresswell Hub cared that she was barren. Nobody on Cresswell Hub knew what a Doran bloodline was or why it mattered. When she walked through the market corridors, she was simply the tall blue-gray alien woman who lived in Block 7 and had a habit of standing very still and watching the children play near the fountain, with an expression that the vendor at the grain stall described to his wife one evening as looking like someone who had lost something and couldn't quite remember what it was. She was not unhappy. She was learning to be something new. And Cole Navarro, with his stained jacket cuffs and his direct questions and his terrible attempts at pronouncing Doran words, was somehow in the middle of all of it. She did not plan what happened next, neither did he. But the 3rd month became the 4th, and the 4th became the 6th, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet, ordinary time, something shifted between them that neither of them could easily put back. He told her once, on an evening when they were sitting on the upper observation deck watching a meteor shower burn across the dark, that she was the most stubborn person he had ever met, and that he meant it as a compliment. She told him that he was reckless with his own safety in ways that were genuinely alarming to observe. He laughed. She did not laugh, but something in her face softened in a way that she realized later was the same thing. By the end of the year, she was not lonely anymore. By the end of the 2nd year, she was his wife. The news reached Dihor Prime in the way all news eventually reaches the places it is least welcome, slowly at first, and then all at once. The court found it amusing initially. A human, their cast-off princess, their hollow branch, had married a human liaison officer. They laughed about it in the corridors and over their long formal meals, and her brother Eldon made a joke at a state dinner that traveled around the social networks for weeks, something about how even a dry well might find use among those who do not know better. Vela heard about the joke. She said nothing. She was standing in a medical bay on Cresswell Hub at the time, and a doctor named Priya Osai, who had kind eyes and a very steady voice, was telling her something that no Doran healer had ever told her. She was going to have a child. The room felt very quiet. She asked Dr. Osai to repeat what she had said. Priya repeated it gently and pulled up the imaging screen to show her. Human and Doran biology, it turned out, were not as incompatible as either species had believed. There had been no successful pairings before to test it. There was no data, but the data was there now, visible on the screen, a small clustered warmth that was entirely real and entirely hers. She sat in that room for a long time after Priya left to give her privacy. She was not crying. Her face was completely still, the way it had been trained to be since childhood. But her hands, folded in her lap, were shaking very slightly, and that was enough. Cole was in the waiting room. When she came out, he read something in her face that she hadn't arranged into words yet, and he stood up slowly. She walked to him and put her forehead against his shoulder and stood there, and he put his arms around her and did not say anything, which was the exact right thing to do. She stayed like that for a long moment. Then she straightened. She had a message to send to Dihor Prime. She had been composing it in her head for 2 years, and now she finally knew how it ended. She recorded the message with Cole sitting across the room, not watching her because he understood she needed to do this alone, but present because she had asked him to be there. She did not use the formal court language of the Doran. She used the common tongue, plain and clean, the way Cole had taught her that real communication worked, without armor, without performance. She told her father that she had received his decision with the dignity it deserved, and that she had built something out of what he had thrown away. She told her brother Eldon that his joke had found its way to her, and that she hoped he enjoyed it, because it was the last time anyone in the Doran court would find her easy to laugh at. She told her sister, separately and more gently, that she hoped the children were well. And then she told them all that she was expecting a child by the spring. A daughter, Dr. Osa had said, though it was early yet, and that the child would be registered under both Commonwealth and Doran law as a citizen of each, and that anyone who wished to dispute that registration was welcome to file their complaint through the formal diplomatic channels that her husband's government maintained with the Empire. She ended the message there. No farewell, no formality, just the truth spoken plainly, landing wherever it would land. She sent it and turned off the recorder. Cole looked up from the book he was pretending to read. "Done." "Done," she said. He nodded. "How do you feel?" She considered the question the way she always considered his questions, seriously, because he asked them seriously. She felt many things. She felt the residue of old pain, which did not disappear just because circumstances had changed. She felt the weight of a future that was now full of things she had not dared to imagine 2 years ago. She felt something in her chest that was warm and wide and had no single word in Doran, though she had found one in his language. "Hopeful," she said. It was a strange word for a Doran to use. They did not prize hope the way humans did. Hope implied uncertainty, and the Empire preferred the appearance of certainty above all else. She was learning to find the uncertainty beautiful. Cole set down the book. "Good. Then let's go home." Cresswell Hub's residential Block 7 was not a palace. It had narrow corridors and a kitchen that was slightly too small and a window that looked out at the maintenance bay instead of the stars. But she had grown blue moss flowers on the windowsill, seeds she had taken from the palace courtyard before she left, and they bloomed every few weeks in a color that was native to a world she no longer called home, and they were hers, and everything around them was hers, and she walked through the door without looking back. The Doran court's response arrived in pieces over the following weeks, and none of it was what Vela had expected. She had prepared for anger. She had prepared for formal rebuke, for the cold language of imperial displeasure, for her father's measured words that always managed to convey warmth and frost simultaneously. What she received instead was silence from the throne, and then noise from everywhere else. The story had spread, she understood that it would, these things always did, and the spreading happened faster than any Doran court communique could manage, because it traveled through human networks, which were chaotic and fast and completely indifferent to whether a story was politically convenient. The version that traveled was not entirely accurate. Stories rarely were, but the shape of it was true. The Barren princess given away as a political gesture had married a human and was carrying a child, which the humans seemed to find moving in a way that surprised even Vela. She received messages from strangers, human strangers mostly, who said they had read about her and wanted her to know they were glad for her. Some of them sent physical gifts through the station postal system. Small things, handmade things, little carved animals and woven blankets, and a ceramic mug that said something in a human language she was still learning. She kept all of them. She set them on the shelf above the blue moss flowers and looked at them sometimes when she was making tea, which she had learned to do properly because Cole's mother, a brisk and warm woman named Donna Navarro, had sent a very specific set of instructions about the correct temperature for steeping the leaves. Donna Navarro had also called. That conversation had been one of the more extraordinary things Vela had experienced in a life that had recently become full of extraordinary things. Donna was a retired schoolteacher from a coastal city on Earth who had strong opinions about nutrition and an immediate practical warmth that reminded Vela, in structure, if not in tone, of the old groundskeeper back in the palace courtyard. She had asked Vela, directly and without preamble, if she was eating enough protein. Vela had said she believed so. Donna had said she was sending a recipe book anyway. The recipe book arrived 3 weeks later and contained, along with many pages of human food preparation, a folded handwritten note inside the cover that said, "Welcome to the family. You were chosen well." Vela read that note more than once. Meanwhile, on Dihor Prime, things were moving in ways she only partially perceived. Her father maintained his silence, which was itself a kind of communication. Her brother Eldon had stopped making jokes, at least publicly. Her sister Myra wrote a careful, private message that was mostly formal in structure but contained, near the end, a single line that was not formal at all. "I hope she looks like you." That line took Vela a full day to respond to, because it opened something she had closed very tightly when she left, and she needed time to open it again without losing her composure entirely. She wrote back. They began a careful correspondence, she and Myra, that was unlike anything they had managed in the palace, where every conversation had been watched and weighed. Cole watched all of this happen and said very little. He had a gift for knowing when she needed to talk, and when she needed someone to simply be in the same room, and she had stopped marveling at this gift only because marveling at things Cole did had the potential to occupy most of her day. He was not a complicated man. He was clear, steady, and genuinely interested in what she thought about things, and he had a way of finding practical solutions to practical problems without treating the emotional dimension of those problems as separate from the practical one. When she told him she was nervous about what the child would be, not its species or its health, but its experience, what it would feel like to be both things and belong completely to neither, he listened to the whole of it without interrupting, and then he said, "She'll have both of us. That's not neither. That's more than either." It was not a poetic answer, but it was exactly the right one. The pregnancy moved through the Commonwealth standard trimesters in a way that Dr. Ose described as remarkably cooperative given the unprecedented biology. There were monitoring appointments and scans, and several rounds of gentle consultations with specialists who were visibly trying to conceal their scientific fascination under professional calm. Vela did not mind the fascination. She was fascinated too. Her body was doing something that Doran medicine had declared it incapable of doing, and the fact of this continued to sit in her chest like something lit from within, warm and stubborn and alive. She named the feeling eventually. She had been looking for a Doran word and failing. She tried Cole's language and found it there. Amazement. Not wonder, which implied distance. Not joy, which implied celebration. Amazement, the specific and slightly disorienting feeling of watching the impossible resolve itself into the actual. One afternoon, about 5 months in, she was sitting in the courtyard of Cresswell Hub's lower level, a small planted area with real soil and a water feature that burbled in a way that she had learned to find calming, when she encountered a Doran family passing through the station on transit. A couple with 2 children, young and clearly from one of the middle provinces given their accent. The woman recognized her. Vela saw it happen on her face. The flash of recognition, and then the calculation, and then the woman looked away and said something quietly to her husband and steered her children past without stopping. Vela watched them go. She felt many things. She felt the familiar ache of the old wound, the one that had been given to her long before her father made his decision, the one that had been applied by 100 small moments across her whole life. She felt it, and then she felt something else underneath it, something that had not been there before. She put her hand on her belly. The child, her daughter, was still months away from arrival, but she was real, and she was there, and she had already changed what it meant to stand in this courtyard being seen, and not seen by people who were supposed to share something with her. She thought, by the time you know this world, little one, things will be different. She was not certain of this, but she intended to make it true. That evening she sat down and wrote a longer document than she had written before, not a message to her family, but something more considered. A testimony, almost, about Doran medical assumptions and the limitations of those assumptions, about the unexplored biological territories between species, about what it meant to be told a thing was impossible, and then to discover the impossibility was never real, only the belief. She wrote it carefully, and she gave it to Cole to read, and he read it and made 3 small suggestions and said that it should be published. She published it. It went through the Commonwealth's Xenobiological Journal network and also quickly, beyond it, because human networks did what they always did with stories that had the right shape. Within a month, she had received responses from 3 universities, 2 research institutions, and a member of the Commonwealth Medical Ethics Board, who wanted to discuss the implications of the Doran diagnostic tradition with her personally. She responded to all of them. She was building something. She could feel it, not the shape of it yet, not the finished thing, but the foundation of it, solid beneath her feet, made from everything she had carried through loss into this new and still uncharted life. And back on Dihor Prime, her father's advisors were reading the same document. She knew because Myra told her, in a message that was slightly more unguarded than the previous ones. The Emperor had read it in private, Myra said. He had not commented on it publicly. He had simply read it and put it down and asked for his afternoon tea, which was, as their sister observed, the Doran imperial equivalent of a long pause. Vela read that and felt something she hadn't expected, not triumph. She had thought when she imagined this day that it would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like something quieter, like the moss flowers on the windowsill, small and persistent and blue in the light of an alien star, growing in a place where nobody had thought to plant them, growing anyway. The day her daughter was born, Cresswell Hub experienced a minor power fluctuation in the lower residential blocks that the maintenance team later blamed on a coolant relay, and would never, because it would seem ridiculous to claim otherwise, connect to any other event. Vela did not notice the power fluctuation. She was otherwise occupied. Cole was beside her the entire time, which he had promised and which he kept, holding her hand with the careful steadiness that was simply the way he moved through the world. Dr. Priya Ose moved through the medical bay with her team in a quiet choreography that Vela had come to trust completely over the preceding months. The birth was longer than expected, which Priya had warned might happen given the physiological differences. But it was not dangerous, and at the end of it there was a sound that Vela had never heard before in her life and would never, for the rest of it, be able to hear without feeling everything rearrange inside her chest. Her daughter was small and had Cole's warm brown skin and Vela's silver-gray undertone beneath it, so that she looked, as Dr. Osai said with a smile, like the light on still water. She had very little hair and extremely strong opinions about what she wanted, expressed loudly and with commitment, which Cole said was definitely a Doran trait, and Vela said was absolutely a human one. They named her Solène. It was a human name from an old language that meant solemn or dignified, and it was also, by coincidence that was not quite coincidence, very close to a Doran word that meant first light. She would carry both. That had been decided early, and it remained the right decision, and looking at her daughter in the hours after the birth, Vela felt more certain of it than of almost anything she had ever believed. She had been told she was barren. She had been told she was a branch without roots, a line that ended, a problem without solution. She had been given away by the people who were supposed to be her family, handed to strangers in a gesture that was meant to be a disposal, dressed up in the language of diplomacy to make the cruelty easier to perform. She had stood on a transport ship with her back straight and her heart turned to stone, and she had told herself she would survive it. She had done more than survive it. She lay in the medical bay with her daughter against her chest, and the quiet sounds of Cole's voice talking to Solène in low, soft tones, narrating the room, which was a human thing he did, always telling their daughter about the world she was entering as though the introduction would help her feel less startled by it. And she thought about the court on Dihor Prime, and the laughter in the corridors, and her brother's joke, and her father's face across the long council table. And she felt none of the things she might have predicted. She felt free, not in a way that required anyone else to acknowledge, not in a way that needed a witness, just freely free, the way you feel when you put down something you have been carrying for so long that you stopped noticing the weight. The message arrived 3 hours later, which was faster than she had expected and suggested that Myra had been waiting. Her sister sent a single image, a photograph from the palace courtyard, the one where Vela had grown the blue moss flowers as a child, which had apparently been replanted and tended in her absence, and a message that said, "Tell me her name. I want to say it right." Vela replied with the name and its two meanings, and a photograph of Solène in her first hour in the world. She received, 20 minutes later, a message from her father. It was short, which was unusual. It was also not quite what she had expected, though she would think about it later and understand that it was the closest he would ever come. He said, "I am told the child is healthy. I am glad." That was all. No acknowledgement of what had passed. No reckoning, no apology. Just those two sentences pressed flat and formal, and underneath them, she knew him well enough to read underneath, something she recognized from her own experience of saying the things she meant in the only language she had available. She did not respond immediately. She handed the reader to Cole and he read it and looked at her. She looked at Solène, who had fallen asleep with the profound conviction of the very young. "What do you want to do with it?" Cole asked. She thought about it. She thought about her father and the court and the years of being the wrong kind of daughter. She thought about Myra and the moss flowers and the recipe book from Donna with the handwritten note inside. She thought about what she wanted to teach her daughter about the space between what people owe you and what they are capable of giving. "I'll answer him," she said, "but not tonight." Cole nodded. "Tonight we just stay here." "Yes," she said, "tonight we just stay here." The station hummed around them. The lights in the medical bay were low and warm. Solène breathed the slow, perfect breaths of someone who has just arrived from somewhere else entirely and has not yet decided what she thinks of this new place, but is cautiously optimistic. Vela thought, "You were told you would not exist. We were both told that in different ways, and look at us now." She closed her eyes. The moss flowers on the windowsill of their apartment in Block 7 were probably blooming. They bloomed on no particular schedule, just when they were ready, and outside, the yellow star that warmed this system was turning the long arc of its day toward evening, and her daughter was asleep against her chest, whole and impossibly real. The laughter from the royal hall of Dihor Prime had long since faded. It had not reached this room. It had not followed her here. It turned out that some things, when you stop giving them a place to live, simply do not travel. Solène was 4 months old the first time she went to Dihor Prime. The invitation had come from an unexpected direction, not from the Emperor, but from the Council of Xenobiological Studies, who had read Vela's published testimony and the subsequent research it had sparked, and who wanted her to participate in a formal conference on interspecies compatibility and the reclassification of several long-standing biological assumptions. It was a professional invitation, carefully worded, and it made no mention of her personal history. But everyone involved understood what it meant. Cole had asked if she wanted to go. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. They traveled as a family, which was itself a kind of statement. Cole in his good jacket, the one without stains, which Donna had sent for the occasion. Vela in Doran formal gray, which she had not worn in 3 years but which still fit, though she was aware her bearing had changed since she last wore it. She stood differently now, with a different relationship to the formality, as if she wore it rather than it wearing her. And Solène, who was 4 months old and luminously unaware of the significance of anything, interested only in the small soft toy attached to her carrier and the faces of strangers who stopped to look at her in the transit corridors. People did stop to look. Vela had expected this and prepared for it. What she had not fully prepared for was the texture of the looking, not the mockery she had left behind, but something more complicated: curiosity, recognition. Some of the Doran faces in the transit corridors were younger, members of a generation that had grown up reading the networks, that had encountered Vela's testimony, and the discussion it had sparked long before they ever expected to see her in person. Some of them looked at Solène the way people look at something that contradicts a thing they were taught and opens up a question they had not known to ask. She let them look. She did not perform anything for them. She simply walked with her husband and her daughter through the station, and onto the connecting shuttle and down through the amber cloud cover of Dihor Prime, toward a city she had left with a straight back and a stone heart, and returned to as something the court had not anticipated when they made their decision about what she was worth. The conference itself was 3 days. The science was serious and the conversations were long, and she was good at it, better than she might have predicted, because she had been living inside the material for years in a way that academic research could not replicate. She spoke clearly and was not diminished by the questions, even the ones designed to test her, and she answered in the common tongue, which was a small choice that was also a clear one. On the second evening she received a summons to the palace. Not formal, not a command, a request from the Chamberlain's office, phrased as an invitation to dinner with the family. Cole read it over her shoulder. "Your call," he said. "I know," she said. She thought about what her daughter would see, in the way that she now thought about many things, not just as they affected her, but as examples, as the kind of moments that lodge in small memories and shape what a child grows to believe about the world and about her own place in it. She wanted Solène to see her mother walk into the palace without fear. She wanted her daughter to carry that image in her body, the way children carry things they see before they have words for them. "We're going," she said. The palace was the same and entirely different, the way places always are when you have changed more than they have. The high crystalline towers were lit for evening, and the courtyard with the moss flowers had been expanded. She noticed immediately, because she had spent so much of her childhood in it, and the flowers were blooming in their particular blue, which was the color of very early morning on Dihor Prime, before the sun came fully up. She stopped in the courtyard for a moment. Cole stopped with her. Solène, in her carrier, reached one small hand toward the flowers with the determined curiosity of her age. Vela thought of the old groundskeeper. She thought of herself at 9 years old, learning to press seeds into soil with careful fingers, being told that these flowers were stubborn and would grow anywhere you gave them half a chance. She thought of the packet of seeds she had taken when she left, tucked inside her bag next to a folded photograph, and a small Doran text her mother had given her years ago, and she thought of the windowsill in Block 7, where those descendants of these flowers now bloomed in the light of a different star. She was made of more than one place now. That was not a wound. That was what she had grown into. The dinner was formal but not cold. Her father was older than she remembered, which should not have surprised her and somehow did. He sat at the head of the long table, and he looked at Cole with the studied neutrality of a man who had decided to make a good faith effort at something that did not come naturally to him. And he looked at Solène with an expression that slipped briefly out of neutrality into something genuine before he collected himself. He spoke to Cole in careful Commonwealth common tongue. Cole spoke back with his characteristic directness, and Vela watched her father process the experience of being spoken to as an equal by a human man, and finding that it was not as strange as he had arranged it to be in his imagination. Her brother Eldon was there, quieter than she remembered, and he did not meet her eyes directly for the first half of the meal, which she understood as a kind of apology from a man who did not know how to make one. Myra was there. Myra looked at Vela across the table and smiled, not the careful court smile but the real one, the one Vela remembered from when they were small, before all the weight of who they were supposed to be had settled onto both of them. Vela smiled back. It was enough. It was the beginning of something. Near the end of the dinner, the Emperor spoke to her directly for the first time. He said that the conference work was important, and that the Empire would be reviewing several of its medical standards in light of the new research, and that this was overdue. He said this to the table generally, in the way that Doran royalty sometimes said important things, as pronouncements rather than admissions, but he looked at her when he said it. She received it without performance. She simply nodded and said that she was glad, and meant it in a way that had no sharpness in it, because she had put the sharpness down a long time ago and had found she did not miss it. After the dinner, when the others were talking, her father came to stand beside her at the large window that looked over the city lights below. Solène had been handed gently around the table all evening and was now asleep in Myra's arms, deeply unconcerned by the political significance of her surroundings. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "She has your coloring." Vela looked at her daughter in her sister's arms. "And her father's," she said. Her father nodded slowly. He said nothing more, but he stayed standing beside her for a few minutes before he moved away, and she understood that this was as much as he had. She did not need more than he had. She had made a life that did not depend on it. Cole appeared at her shoulder. She leaned into him very slightly, the small private gesture that they had made into a language over the years. He was steady, as always. The stars outside the palace window were the same stars that had burned over this city when she was a child being told what she would never have, what she would never be. They were the same stars. She was not the same. On the last morning before they returned to Cresswell Hub, she went to the courtyard alone, early, before anyone else was awake. She stood among the moss flowers and felt the cool morning air of Dihor Prime on her face for the first time in 3 years. She was 40 cycles old. She had a daughter and a husband and a home that she had built from nothing and work that mattered and a correspondence with her sister that was only getting richer with time. She had a recipe book from her mother-in-law and a shelf of gifts from strangers and a windowsill on a space station, orbiting a yellow star where flowers that grew on this planet bloomed every few weeks as if to remind her where she came from. She crouched down and pressed her fingers into the soil at the base of the flowers, the way she had been taught when she was 9 years old. It was the same soil. She had come from it. She had also grown past it, in the way that things do when given the chance, not away from their roots, but upward toward whatever light was available. She collected a small packet of seeds to take back. There was more room on the windowsill, and Solène was old enough now to be beginning to notice colors, and she should know this one, this particular blue, this very early morning color, because it was part of what she came from. Back in the apartment in Block 7, the moss flowers were waiting, persistent and unhurried, growing in a place where nobody had planted them on purpose, growing because someone had brought them there and given them light and soil, and refused to believe they could not live. They were, as it turned out, exactly right. So was she. So was everything that had grown from the choice she did not make freely but made beautifully, the choice to survive, and then to do more than that, and then to let more than that become everything, and to stand at the end of it in a courtyard at dawn on a world that had once discarded her, with soil on her fingers and seeds in her pocket, and her daughter waiting in the warm rooms above, breathing the long, confident breaths of someone who has never once been told there was something she could not become. The transport home left at mid-morning. She was on it, back straight, chin level, heart open and full and entirely her own. She was not coming back as a princess. She was coming back as a mother, and that, it turned out, was the more powerful thing. End.